This is Rise, where truth is uncovered and black stories rise from silence to strength. Real voices, bold truth, unshakable legacy. Welcome to Rise. You're walking home from work on a beautiful summer afternoon. The neighborhood is alive with families, street vendors, and the warm scent of fresh bread from the local bakery. You're humming your favorite tune, thinking about your upcoming community art project. Life feels good. Then suddenly, two police officers appear. "Ma'am, stop right there." Before you can even process what's happening, cold metal handcuffs snap around your wrists. You're standing in the middle of a busy street, confused, humiliated, and completely innocent. This isn't fiction. This is exactly what happened to Monique Davis in the heart of Westmont just 7 minutes before those same officers would be on their knees, begging for her forgiveness. Have you ever been judged by your appearance? Has someone ever made assumptions about who you are based on nothing more than how you look or where you're walking? Have you ever felt that sinking feeling when you realize someone has already decided you're guilty before you've even opened your mouth? If you've ever experienced that gut-wrenching moment of being misunderstood, misjudged, or worse, targeted because of your race, then Monique's story will hit you right in the heart. But here's what makes this story extraordinary. It doesn't end where you think it does. We're living in a time when stories of racial profiling flood our news feeds daily. Black men and women across America face these devastating encounters with law enforcement, often with tragic consequences. The statistics are staggering, the pain is real, and the need for change has never been more urgent. But every once in a while, something happens that gives us hope. Something that shows us that accountability is possible, that growth can happen, and that even in our darkest moments, humanity can still shine through. Monique Davis never expected to become the center of a story that would challenge everything two police officers thought they knew about justice, bias, and the power of a sincere apology. She was a respected community organizer and art teacher, beloved in her neighborhood for her tireless work bringing people together. On this particular day, she had just finished a community board meeting and was heading to her favorite cafe for a well-deserved cup of tea. She was wearing her signature patterned blouse and wide-brimmed hat, the same outfit that somehow made her a target for a case of mistaken identity that would shake the very foundations of how these officers viewed their role in the community. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe in the power of truth, accountability, and second chances, hit that like button right now, because what you're about to hear will challenge your assumptions about police encounters, human nature, and the possibility of real change. In just 7 minutes, this ordinary Tuesday afternoon would transform from a routine walk home into a powerful lesson about bias, courage, and the life-changing impact of admitting when you're wrong. Those two white officers, Blake Allen and Henry Foster, thought they were doing their job. They had received a vague tip about a suspicious woman with a distinct style near the community center. In their minds, they were protecting their community, following protocol, keeping everyone safe. They had no idea they were about to make the biggest mistake of their careers. But here's what makes Monique's story different from the countless others we've heard. It's not just about the injustice. It's about what happened when those officers realized their terrible error. It's about the moment when authority crumbled into humanity, when pride gave way to profound remorse, and when two grown men found themselves publicly pleading for forgiveness from a woman they had just wronged. This is the story of 7 minutes that changed everything, for Monique, for those officers, and for an entire community watching it all unfold. Stay with me, because what happens next will restore your faith in the power of accountability and show you that even in our most divided times, bridges can still be built. Westmont wasn't just another urban neighborhood. It was a community with soul. Tree-lined streets buzzed with life as children played hopscotch on sidewalks while their parents chatted over garden fences. Colorful murals decorated brick walls, each one telling a story of the diverse families who called this place home. Corner stores displayed handwritten signs in multiple languages, and the sound of jazz music drifted from open windows on lazy summer evenings. This was Monique Davis's world, and she had helped shape every beautiful inch of it. For over 15 years, Monique had been the heartbeat of Westmont's community organizing efforts. When the city threatened to close the local elementary school, she organized protests that saved it. When developers wanted to tear down the community garden where elderly residents grew vegetables for their families, she rallied neighbors to fight back successfully. When racial tensions flared between different ethnic groups in the area, Monique hosted monthly dinners that brought everyone together around shared meals and honest conversations. As an art teacher at Westmont Elementary, she was the kind of educator who stayed late to help struggling students, who bought supplies with her own money when the school budget ran short, and who remembered every child's birthday. Her classroom walls were covered with student artwork that celebrated their heritage, their dreams, and their potential. But Monique's influence extended far beyond the school walls. She sat on the community board, volunteered at the local food bank, and organized annual block parties that had become legendary throughout the city. When people had problems, whether it was navigating immigration paperwork, finding job training, or dealing with landlord disputes, they came to Monique. She was the kind of neighbor everyone wanted and the kind of leader every community deserved. On this particular Tuesday, July 18th, Monique had just wrapped up a 3-hour community board meeting about the upcoming Neighborhood Arts Festival. The meeting had gone well. They'd secured funding for new art installations and planned workshops for local youth. Her calendar showed a 6 p.m. meeting with the festival's volunteer coordinators at Rose's Cafe, her favorite spot for their incredible chamomile tea and quiet atmosphere perfect for planning sessions. At 5:45 p.m., she stepped out of the community center, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat against the late afternoon sun. Her patterned blouse, a vibrant blue and gold design her sister had brought back from a trip to Ghana, caught the light as she walked. She carried her worn leather bag filled with meeting notes, volunteer contact lists, and sketch ideas for the festival murals. Everything about this day felt routine, comfortable, normal. What Monique didn't know was that 3 blocks away, at the local police precinct, a dispatcher had just logged a tip that would shatter her peaceful afternoon. The caller had reported seeing a suspicious woman with distinctive clothing loitering near the community center. The description was frustratingly vague. African-American female, unusual hat, patterned clothing, appears to be casing the building. Officers Blake Allen and Henry Foster received the call at 5:47 p.m. They were experienced cops who prided themselves on quick response times and thorough investigations. Neither man had any idea they were about to encounter the most respected woman in Westmont. The collision course was set. Monique was humming an old Ella Fitzgerald tune when she heard the footsteps behind her. Heavy, deliberate, getting closer. She glanced over her shoulder and saw 2 white police officers approaching with purposeful strides. Her humming stopped. "Ma'am, please stop right there." Officer Blake Allen's voice cut through the peaceful evening air like a blade. His hand rested on his radio as he closed the distance between them, his partner Henry Foster flanking her from the left side. Both men wore expressions of focused intensity that made Monique's stomach drop. She stopped walking, her hand instinctively tightening around her leather bag strap. "Is there a problem, officers?" "We need to speak with you," Foster said, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "You match a description we received." Monique felt her heartbeat quicken. A description? She looked around the busy street, hoping this was some kind of mistake, that they were talking to someone else. but their attention was fixed solely on her. "I don't understand," she said, her voice steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. "What description?" "I was just heading to a meeting at Rose's Cafe." "Ma'am, we're going to need you to place your hands behind your back," Alan commanded, already reaching for his handcuffs. The words hit Monique like a physical blow. "Excuse me? For what? I haven't done anything wrong." But even as she spoke, she could see in their eyes that her protests didn't matter. These officers had already made up their minds about who she was and what she represented. In their view, she was guilty of something, though she had no idea what. "Ma'am, don't make this difficult," Foster warned, moving closer. "Just comply, and we can sort this out quickly." Monique's mind raced. She thought about all the news stories she'd seen, all the community meetings where they discussed what to do during police encounters. Stay calm. Don't resist. Try to record if possible. But her phone was buried deep in her bag, and these officers weren't giving her time to think, let alone react. "I am Monique Davis," she said, her voice rising with desperation. "I work at Westmont Elementary. I was just at a community board meeting. You can call the school. You can call." The handcuffs snapped around her wrist before she could finish her sentence. The cold metal bit into her skin as Alan secured them tightly. The sound, that distinctive metallic click, echoed in her ears like a gunshot. She felt her knees go weak as the reality of her situation crashed over her. "This can't be happening," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "This cannot be happening to me." Foster was already on his radio, speaking in police codes she didn't understand. Alan maintained his grip on her arm, preventing her from moving as curious onlookers began to gather. Mrs. Patterson from the corner market was the first to stop, her mouth falling open when she recognized Monique. "What's going on?" "That's Miss Davis. She teaches my grandson." A teenager with his phone already outstepped closer, his camera capturing every moment. "This is messed up," he muttered, but kept recording. More people began to cluster around them. Neighbors who knew Monique, strangers who sensed injustice unfolding, community members who had heard too many stories like this one. The casual evening foot traffic on Cedar Avenue transformed into an impromptu audience for a scene that nobody wanted to witness, but nobody could look away from. "Call someone," Mrs. Patterson shouted. "Call the school. Call Reverend Williams. They know her." But the officers weren't listening to the crowd. They were focused on their procedures, their protocols, their assumptions about the woman standing before them in handcuffs. Monique felt humiliated, violated, and utterly powerless. The woman who had spent years advocating for others, who had fought City Hall and won, who had organized her community around principles of justice and equality, now stood helpless on a public street, restrained like a criminal. "I have rights," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I have done nothing wrong. Nothing." The crowd murmured in agreement, phones recording from multiple angles. In the age of social media, this moment was being documented in real time, shared instantly, broadcast to networks of friends and followers who would demand answers. Alan looked uncomfortable as the crowd grew larger and more vocal. Foster checked his watch, 5:52 p.m. They'd been there for just 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. If you believe everyone deserves justice, if you believe that being black in America shouldn't make you a suspect in your own neighborhood, share this story. Because what happens next will show you just how quickly things can change when truth confronts prejudice. The weight of those handcuffs, the stares of the crowd, the violation of her dignity, all of it was about to lead to a moment of reckoning that would surprise everyone present. Time moved differently when you were standing in handcuffs on a public street. Each second stretched endlessly as Monique stood between the two officers, her wrists bound behind her back, watching her neighbors' faces shift from confusion to outrage. The summer evening that had felt so warm and inviting just minutes earlier now felt oppressive, heavy with tension and disbelief. 5:53 p.m. Monique closed her eyes and tried to center herself the way she taught her students during stressful moments. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, release for 4. But the breathing exercises that worked so well in her classroom felt useless here. Every exhale reminded her of the metal cutting into her wrists. How did my life become a hashtag? She thought bitterly. She had seen this scene play out countless times on news feeds. Black men and women detained, questioned, humiliated in public spaces. She had attended rallies, signed petitions, donated to legal defense funds. But standing here now, living it firsthand, the full weight of the experience crashed over her like a wave. This was about more than just a case of mistaken identity. This was about assumptions made based on skin color, about guilt presumed rather than innocence protected, about a system that saw her as a threat rather than a treasured community member. Officer Foster shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Monique and the growing crowd. Something about the situation wasn't sitting right with him. The woman they had detained didn't match the energy of someone who was casing a building. She seemed genuinely confused, and the crowd's reaction suggested she was well known and respected in the area. "Blake," he said quietly to his partner, "maybe we should double-check the description we got." Alan was busy managing the crowd, asking people to step back and disperse, but Foster's doubt was growing stronger by the minute. He pulled out his notepad and reviewed the details from the tip. African-American female, unusual hat, patterned clothing, appears to be casing the building. The description was maddeningly vague. Half the women in this neighborhood could fit that basic profile on any given day. 5:55 p.m. Monique's internal narrative had shifted from shock to a deep, aching sadness. She thought about her students who would see this video circulating online. How would she explain to them that their art teacher, the woman who taught them about justice and equality through creative expression, had been handcuffed on the street like a criminal? She thought about her elderly mother, who had lived through the civil rights era and warned her about these exact moments. "Baby," her mother had said countless times, "it doesn't matter how educated you are, how much good you do in the community. To some people, all they'll ever see is your skin color." Mrs. Patterson was still shouting from the sidewalk, trying to convince the officers they had made a mistake. She organized a fundraiser for the fire department. She got the stop sign installed on Maple Street. This woman is a pillar of this community. But her words seemed to bounce off the officers like raindrops on glass. 5:56 p.m. The radio crackled to life. "Unit 47, we have an update on the suspicious person report near the community center." Foster immediately reached for his radio. "Unit 47, go ahead. Be advised, we have a subject in custody 2 blocks south of your location. Female matching the description, found with burglary tools. Suspect has been confirmed and is being transported." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Foster's face went pale. He looked at Alan, who had clearly heard the radio transmission. Both officers suddenly understood the magnitude of what they had just done. "Alan," Foster said, his voice barely above a whisper, I heard it," Alan replied, his confident demeanor evaporating instantly. Monique caught the exchange and felt a flutter of hope mixed with fury. The real suspect had been found, which meant she was exactly what she had been claiming all along, an innocent woman walking to a meeting. 5:57 p.m. The crowd sensed the shift in the officer's energy. Phones continued recording as the 2 men exchanged worried glances, their radio squawking with additional details about the actual suspect who had been apprehended blocks away. For 7 excruciating minutes, Monique Davis had endured the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in her own neighborhood. 7 minutes of violated dignity, of assumptions based on prejudice, of a system failing its most dedicated citizens. But those 7 minutes were about to end in a way nobody expected. 5:57 p.m. Officer Foster's hand trembled as he lowered his radio. The dispatcher's words echoed in his mind. Suspect has been confirmed and is being transported. The real criminal was in custody 2 blocks away. The woman standing before them in handcuffs was completely innocent. Alan's face drained of color as the full weight of their error crashed down on him. They had just publicly humiliated, restrained, and violated the rights of an innocent woman based on nothing more than a vague description and their own assumptions. "Oh God," Foster whispered, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "We've made a terrible mistake." The admission hit the gathered neighbors like electricity. Phones continued recording as the 2 officers looked at each other with dawning horror. Their confident, authoritative postures crumbled instantly, replaced by the body language of men who suddenly realized they had become the villains in their own story. "Ma'am," Alan said, his voice completely different now, softer, uncertain, filled with shame. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. We were wrong." Monique's eyes blazed with a mixture of vindication and fury. "You were wrong?" she repeated, her voice rising. "You handcuffed me in front of my neighbors, treated me like a criminal, humiliated me on a public street, and now you're telling me you were wrong?" Foster was already reaching for his keys, his hands shaking as he moved to unlock the handcuffs. "Please, ma'am, let me get these off you right now." The moment the metal restraints clicked open and fell away from her wrists, Monique felt a rush of relief, so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. She rubbed the red marks where the cuffs had bitten into her skin, physical evidence of an injustice that would stay with her long after this moment ended. "We are deeply, deeply sorry," Foster continued, his voice breaking slightly. "There's no excuse for what we just put you through." But Alan went further. In front of dozens of witnesses, in front of rolling cameras that would soon share this moment with thousands, he did something that shocked everyone present. He removed his hat and looked directly into Monique's eyes. "Ma'am, my name is Blake Allen, and I have dishonored my badge today. I made assumptions about you based on your appearance, and I was completely wrong. I violated your rights, your dignity, and your trust in law enforcement." His voice was steady but filled with genuine remorse. "I am begging you to forgive me." The crowd fell silent. Even the traffic noise seemed to fade as everyone processed what they were witnessing. A police officer publicly acknowledging his mistake and pleading for forgiveness from the woman he had wronged. Foster followed his partner's lead, stepping forward with tears in his eyes. "I need you to know that this was our failure, not yours. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. We let our biases cloud our judgment, and we hurt an innocent person. I am so ashamed of my actions today." Monique stood there, processing emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Part of her wanted to scream, to unleash all the anger and humiliation she had just endured. Part of her wanted to demand consequences, accountability, systemic change. But looking at these 2 men, really looking at them, she saw something she hadn't expected: genuine human remorse. Not the defensive posturing she had witnessed in too many similar situations, but real recognition of the harm they had caused. "Do you understand what you put me through?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with pain. "Do you understand that I will never forget this moment? That my students will see this video? That my mother will watch her daughter being treated like a criminal for the crime of being black while walking to a meeting?" "Yes," Alan said without hesitation. "And I will carry that responsibility for the rest of my career. We will carry it." Mrs. Patterson called out from the crowd. "This woman has done more for this community than both of you combined." Other voices joined in, not with anger now, but with testimony. Neighbors began sharing stories of Monique's contributions, her kindness, her leadership. The narrative was shifting from arrest to vindication, from humiliation to honor. Foster pulled out his radio again. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We need a supervisor at Cedar Avenue and Oak Street immediately. We have a situation that requires full documentation and review." He was calling for accountability, demanding that their mistake be officially recorded and investigated. Monique watched these two officers, who minutes earlier had been symbols of everything wrong with the system, transform into human beings capable of growth, remorse, and change. "Your apology doesn't erase what happened," she said finally. "But it's a start. The question is, what are you going to do differently tomorrow?" Alan nodded solemnly. "Everything, ma'am. We're going to do everything differently." The handcuffs lay on the ground between them, a symbol of injustice defeated by truth, accountability, and the power of genuine human remorse. Within minutes, Supervisor Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez arrived on the scene. She took one look at the crowd, the phones recording, and the two officers standing with heads bowed in front of Monique, and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Officers Allen and Foster, step aside." "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Rodriguez. I need to hear exactly what happened here." Monique recounted the entire encounter while Rodriguez took detailed notes. The supervisor's face grew more serious with each detail. The vague tip, the immediate handcuffs, the 7 minutes of public humiliation based solely on assumptions. "Ma'am, on behalf of the department, I apologize for this unacceptable treatment," Rodriguez said. "This incident will be fully investigated, and there will be consequences." But what happened next surprised everyone. Officer Allen stepped forward again. "Lieutenant, I want to request immediate retraining on implicit bias and community engagement. For both of us. This can't happen again." Foster nodded emphatically. "And we want to personally attend the next community board meeting. We need to understand this neighborhood better, understand the people we're supposed to serve." The crowd's anger began to shift into cautious hope. These weren't empty promises from officers trying to save their careers. This felt like genuine commitment to change. Mrs. Patterson wiped tears from her eyes. "Ms. Davis has been fighting for this community for 15 years. Maybe now you'll understand why we need police who see us as neighbors, not threats." Reverend Williams from the local church pushed through the crowd. "Monique, are you all right? Do you need medical attention? Legal representation?" "I'm okay, Reverend," Monique replied, though her voice still shook. "But we need to make sure this leads to real change, not just apologies." Lieutenant Rodriguez handed Monique her business card. "Ma'am, you have my word that this incident will result in policy changes. We'll be reviewing our response protocols and implementing additional training." Alan looked directly at the recording phones. "If anyone watching this has experienced something similar, please speak up. Report it. Hold us accountable. We can't change what we don't acknowledge." The teenager who had been recording since the beginning spoke up. "This is going viral already. People need to see this. Both the injustice and how it should be handled when officers realize they're wrong." Foster addressed the crowd. "We failed today, but failure can teach us if we're willing to learn. This community deserves better from us." As the crowd slowly dispersed, neighbors approached Monique with hugs, words of support, and promises to attend the next community meeting where this incident would surely be discussed. Comment below if you've experienced something similar. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And like Monique's experience shows us, accountability is possible when we demand it. The evening air felt different now, not with the tension of injustice, but with the possibility of progress. Real change had begun with two officers brave enough to admit they were wrong and a community strong enough to hold them accountable while still believing in the possibility of growth. 3 weeks later, Monique Davis stood before a packed auditorium at the Westmont Community Center, sharing her story with city council members, police leadership, and concerned citizens. The same building where she had walked out that fateful Tuesday afternoon was now the center of meaningful dialogue about police reform. Change doesn't happen overnight, she told the audience. But it starts with moments like this. When people are willing to admit their mistakes, learn from them, and commit to doing better. Officers Allen and Foster were in the front row, having completed additional training and become advocates for reform within their department. Their willingness to acknowledge fault publicly had sparked department-wide conversations about implicit bias and community engagement. Monique's experience became a catalyst for policy changes. Mandatory bias training, improved community oversight, and new protocols requiring supervisory approval before detaining individuals based on vague descriptions. Every person has dignity, Monique concluded her speech. Every person deserves to be seen as human first. Her story proves that accountability is possible, that growth can happen, and that even our most painful experiences can become stepping stones to progress. If you believe in stories of resilience like Monique's, stories that show us how ordinary people create extraordinary change, subscribe for more powerful narratives that inspire hope and demand justice. Together, we rise.